She never planned to be there that night. One phone call, one favor for her sister, one borrowed uniform that didn't belong to her life. As she stepped into the silent mansion, she thought it would be just another cleaning shift. Dust, floors, invisibility. But behind one closed door was a man the world admired and feared. A powerful CEO, a single father drowning in grief, secrets, and exhaustion. When their paths crossed, neither of them knew this small decision would unravel buried pain, awaken long-lost hope, and rewrite both their futures forever. One shift, one meeting. Everything changed. She almost didn't answer the phone. It was past 6 p.m., the sky already fading into a bruised purple, and Aisha's feet ached from standing all day at the tailor shop. The phone buzzed again, her sister's name flashing urgently. Something in her chest tightened before she even picked up. "Please," Sana said the moment the call connected. Her voice cracked. "I know it's last minute, but I'm sick. Fever's high. I can't stand. If I miss this shift, I lose the job." Aisha closed her eyes. Sana's maid job paid more than her own work. It covered rent, medicine, survival. "Where?" Aisha asked quietly. There was a pause. Then Sana whispered, "The Alrech house." Aisha's breath caught. Everyone in the city knew that name. Daniel Alrech, tech CEO, billionaire, newspaper favorite, ruthless in business, a man whose company logos glowed on skyscrapers, a man who never gave interviews anymore, a man people said hadn't smiled since his wife died. "That's not allowed," Aisha said. "They'll notice I'm not you." "They won't," insisted Sana. "Night shift, minimal interaction, just cleaning. Please, Aya, just this once." Aisha stared at the peeling wall of their apartment, the unpaid electricity bill taped beside the door, Sana coughing in the background. "Okay," Aisha said. "I'll go." She didn't know she'd just stepped into the night that would fracture her life into before and after. The uniform felt wrong on her body. Too stiff, too anonymous. Aisha tucked her hair under the cap, hands trembling as the taxi rolled through iron gates taller than any building she'd ever entered. The mansion rose from the darkness like a silent judge, glass, steel, and shadow. A security guard barely glanced at her badge. "Late," he muttered, opening the door. Inside, the air smelled of lemon polish and loneliness. The house was spotless already, too spotless, as if no one truly lived there. Aisha worked quietly, wiping counters that didn't need cleaning, afraid her footsteps sounded too loud. She reminded herself, don't look, don't touch, don't exist. That's what maids were supposed to do, exist without being seen. Then she heard it. A soft, broken sound. Not music, not conversation. A child crying. Aisha froze. The sound came from upstairs. She hesitated. Her instructions were clear, ground floor only. But the crying grew sharper, panicked, breathless, the kind that made your heart recognize danger before your mind did. She climbed the stairs. Every step felt like crossing a line she couldn't uncross. At the end of the hallway, a door stood half open, light spilled out. Inside, a little boy sat curled on the floor, arms wrapped around his knees. Tears streaked his face. His breathing was erratic. Aisha rushed forward without thinking. "Hey," she whispered, crouching. "It's okay. I'm here." The boy flinched. "Don't touch me," he said, voice shaking. "Daddy says strangers leave." Aisha swallowed. "I won't touch you, I promise. What's your name?" "Ethan." "I'm Aisha. I'm just cleaning downstairs. I heard you." Ethan shook his head violently. "I can't breathe. It hurts." Panic surged through her. She remembered Sana's childhood asthma. The signs were unmistakable. "Where's your inhaler?" she asked calmly, though her hands were shaking. Ethan pointed weakly toward the bed. She grabbed it, knelt beside him, guiding him through each breath the way she'd once done for her sister. Slowly, agonizingly, his breathing eased. Only then did she feel it. The presence. She looked up. A man stood in the doorway, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a tailored suit that screamed authority even without words. His face was carved from exhaustion, eyes sharp and dark. Daniel Alrech, the CEO. For a split second, the world stopped. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, his voice low, controlled, and dangerous. Aisha stood quickly, heart pounding. I heard your son. He was having an attack." Daniel's gaze snapped to Ethan, then back to her. Something flickered, fear, then anger. "You were not authorized to be upstairs." "I know," she said softly. "I'm sorry, but he needed help." Ethan looked up. "She helped me, Dad." Silence slammed into the room. Daniel knelt beside his son, inspecting him with hands that trembled just slightly. When he was satisfied Ethan was okay, he stood again. His eyes locked onto Aisha. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated. She should have said Santa, lied, stayed invisible. But something in his gaze made lying impossible. "Aisha," she said, "I'm covering a shift." His jaw tightened. "You're not the maid assigned here." "No, sir." Another pause, heavy, calculating. "Leave," he said finally. "I'll handle this." Shame flooded her. She nodded, turning toward the door. "Wait." She stopped. Daniel exhaled slowly, like a man fighting himself. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for my son." Aisha nodded once and left the room, heart racing. She didn't know it yet, but Daniel Alrech had just broken his most important rule. He had let someone in. As Aisha descended the stairs, she felt it, the sense that the house was no longer empty. And somewhere behind her, Daniel watched the hallway long after she disappeared, wondering why the silence felt heavier now that she was gone. Because for the first time in years, someone had seen his son when he couldn't. Daniel Alrech didn't sleep that night. Long after the house fell silent again, after Ethan's breathing evened out and the doctor's emergency number on his phone remained unused, Daniel sat alone in his study, staring at the security footage paused on his tablet. A single frame. A maid kneeling on the floor beside his son. Not frantic, not careless, calm, present, human. He replayed it again and again. It angered him, how easily she had done what he, with all his money and power, had failed to do in that moment. Be there. Aisha returned home just before dawn, her body heavy, her mind louder than the city outside. Sana was asleep on the couch, medicine bottle on the table. Aisha covered her with a blanket, then sat on the edge of the bed replaying the night in fragments. The boy's gasping breath, the doctor's emergency number on his phone remained unused, the dead standing like a stranger. Aisha told herself it was over. Just a shift, just a favor, just a memory. She didn't know the Alrech house had rules, and breaking one always came with consequences. The next afternoon, Sana's phone rang. She answered cheerfully, then went pale. "Yes, yes, sir. I understand." When she hung up, she stared at the wall. "They know," she whispered. Aisha's heart dropped. "Know what?" "That they didn't come in last night, that someone else covered." The room felt smaller. "Did they fire you?" Aisha asked. Sana shook her head slowly. "No, they asked for you." Aisha laughed nervously. "That's not funny." "They want you back, specifically you." The laughter died in Aisha's throat. Daniel stood in the kitchen that evening, watching the clock. He hated himself for this. Hated that he had summoned a stranger because his son hadn't stopped asking questions since morning. Is Aisha coming back? Will she read to me again? Does she know the breathing trick? Daniel told himself this was temporary, practical, logical. But when the door opened and she stepped inside, wearing the same borrowed uniform, his chest tightened in a way no boardroom confrontation ever had. "You wanted to see me, sir?" Aisha asked carefully. Daniel nodded. "You'll be paid extra, today and ongoing." "Ongoing?" she repeated. "You're reassigned. My son responds to you." Aisha hesitated. "I'm not trained for childcare." "You're trained to care," Daniel said, then stiffened as if surprised by his own words. Ethan peeked from behind the couch. His face lit up. "You came!" Something warm and dangerous spread through Aisha's chest. She smiled before she could stop herself. Days turned into weeks. Aisha learned the rhythms of the house, the quiet hours, the unspoken grief, the way Daniel hovered at doorways instead of entering rooms fully. She cooked meals Ethan actually ate, read stories Daniel had bought but never opened, sat beside the boy during storms when his anxiety spiked. And slowly, Daniel began to notice something unsettling. The house was changing. Ethan laughed more. The silence retreated. And Aisha filled spaces Daniel hadn't known were empty. He found himself watching her hands as she worked, listening to her voice even when she wasn't speaking to him, wondering what kind of life shaped someone so gentle in a world that hadn't been gentle back. One evening, he stayed home instead of going to the office. He told himself it was for Ethan, but when Aisha looked surprised to see him at the dinner table, something in him softened and broke. "You don't have to stay," Aisha said politely. "I want to," Daniel replied. The words echoed, want. He hadn't used that word in years. They ate in an awkward, fragile peace. Then Daniel asked, "Why did you come upstairs that night?" Aisha paused. "Because no one should cry alone." The answer struck deeper than any accusation. Daniel looked down at his plate. "My wife used to say that." The room stilled. Aisha didn't know there was a rule against mentioning her. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Daniel shook his head. "Don't. Most people pretend she never existed." He looked at Aisha, really looked. "You don't," he said. Something shifted between them then, something unspoken and dangerous. The next morning, the tabloids struck. A photo, a maid leaving the Alrech Mansion, a headline dripping with implication. CEO's new woman, mystery maid spotted at Alrech estate. Daniel read it once, then twice. Anger surged, not at the press, at himself, because he knew exactly why the idea unsettled him. And across the city, Aisha stared at the same headline on her cracked phone screen, her hands shaking. She hadn't just crossed a line, she had stepped into a world that would never let her remain invisible again. The city decided who Aisha was before she ever got the chance. By morning, the photo was everywhere. Comment sections burned with cruel certainty. "Gold digger. Another maid chasing money. Poor girl doesn't know her place." Aisha didn't read past the first few lines. She didn't need to. Shame had a sound, and it was the buzzing silence in her ears as she folded the uniform with shaking hands. She wasn't supposed to be seen like this. Not by the world. Not by him. Daniel arrived home early that day, fury simmering beneath his calm exterior. The PR team had already called, lawyers had advice, assistants waited for instructions, but none of them mattered. Only one question did. Was Aisha okay? He found her in the kitchen, standing too straight, like someone waiting to be dismissed. "I'll leave," she said before he could speak. "This isn't what I wanted. I didn't ask for attention." "I know," Daniel replied. His voice was tight. "This is my fault." She shook her head. "It's mine. I forgot my place." The words hit him harder than any accusation. "That's not true," he said sharply. Aisha laughed softly. "It is. People like me don't belong in stories like yours." Daniel stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You belong wherever you choose to stand." Their eyes met. For a moment, the world narrowed to the space between them. Then Ethan's voice broke the tension. "Are you leaving forever?" Aisha turned quickly. Ethan stood in the doorway, clutching his book, eyes wide with fear. She knelt. "No, I just might not come every day." Ethan's lip trembled. He ran into her arms without hesitation. Daniel watched, something twisting painfully in his chest. He had lost his wife to illness. He refused to lose this sense of home to fear. That night, Daniel made a choice that terrified him. He went public. A brief statement, no explanations, no defenses. "Aisha is a valued employee who showed extraordinary care for my son. Any suggestion otherwise is false." The backlash was immediate. The board didn't like it. His mother didn't like it. The investors liked it even less. But Ethan slept peacefully for the first time in weeks, and that mattered more. Time passed, heavier now. Daniel and Aisha moved carefully around each other, aware of every glance, every silence. They avoided being alone together, but when they were, the air felt charged. One evening, a storm trapped them inside. Thunder shook the windows. Ethan slept through it thanks to Aisha's calming routine. Daniel stood by the window, watching rain blur the city lights. "She used to love storms," he said quietly. Aisha knew who he meant. "She said the sky was just letting go." Daniel smiled faintly. "You sound like her." Aisha stiffened. "I'm not trying to replace anyone." "I know," Daniel said. "That's why it scares me." The truth slipped out before he could stop it. Silence followed. Heavy. Honest. Aisha whispered, "I can't be someone's almost." Daniel turned to her, pain and clarity colliding. "You're not." Their eyes met again. This time, neither looked away. He leaned in, stopped, pulled back. "I'm sorry," he said roughly. "I shouldn't." Aisha stepped closer instead. "You're allowed to want again. So am I." The kiss was gentle, brief, but it shattered every carefully built wall between them. The next morning, reality struck back. Daniel's assistant arrived with urgent news. The board had scheduled an emergency meeting. Ultimatum: distance himself from the maid or risk his position. Daniel stared at the glass walls of his office, the city he had conquered now turning on him. For the first time in his life, success felt meaningless. That evening, he stood before Aisha with the weight of everything unsaid. "They're going to make me choose," he admitted. Aisha swallowed hard. "Then choose yourself." "You are myself," he said quietly. She shook her head, tears gathering. "I won't be the reason Ethan loses his father's stability." Daniel reached for her hand. She stepped back. "Some love comes at the wrong time," she whispered. She handed him the folded uniform. "I can't stay." Daniel watched her walk away, and for the second time in his life, he didn't chase. The house went quiet again. Not the peaceful kind, the hollow kind. Daniel noticed it first in the mornings. No gentle clatter of dishes, no soft humming drifting through the hallway. Ethan ate in silence, pushing food around his plate. "She said goodbye wrong," Ethan muttered one morning. Daniel looked up. "What do you mean?" "She hugged me like people do when they don't plan to come back." Daniel's chest tightened. He hadn't realized how much he'd relied on Aisha to translate the world for his son and for himself. Aisha returned to a life that felt suddenly too small. The tailor shop, The crowded buses, the weight of pretending she hadn't touched something extraordinary. Sana watched her closely. "You love him," Sana said one night. Aisha didn't deny it. "That doesn't mean I get to keep him." She tried to forget the mansion, tried to forget the way Daniel looked at her when he thought no one was watching, but forgetting didn't stop the dreams. The board meeting ended with polite smiles and brutal decisions. Daniel stepped down as CEO. Publicly, it was framed as a strategic sabbatical. Privately, it was exile. His mother didn't understand. The press smelled blood. And Ethan? Ethan finally asked the question Daniel had been dreading. "Did you lose your job because of Aisha?" Daniel knelt. "No, I lost it because I forgot what mattered, and I don't regret that." Ethan nodded slowly. "Can we find her?" The question struck like lightning. Daniel realized then what he'd been too afraid to admit. Letting go hadn't protected anyone. It had only delayed the truth. Across the city, Aisha faced her own reckoning. Sana collapsed at work. Hospital, bills, fear. Aisha sat beside her sister's bed, guilt crushing her chest. She had tasted a different life and been punished for it. Or so she thought. The doctor returned, holding a file. "Someone covered the expenses," he said. Aisha frowned. "Who?" The doctor checked. "Daniel Alrech." Her heart stuttered. Daniel stood outside the hospital that night, hands shoved into his coat pockets, unsure if he deserved to go inside. When Aisha saw him, anger flared first. "You can't just fix things with money," she said sharply. "I'm not trying to," he replied. "I'm trying to show up." She faltered. He took a breath. "I left the company." Her eyes widened. "What?" "I chose the only thing that felt real, and I was wrong to think love had to cost someone else." Tears slipped free. "I didn't leave because I stopped loving you," Aisha whispered. "I left because I thought I had to." Daniel stepped closer. "You don't." He held out his hand, not commanding, not pleading, offering. Aisha hesitated, then placed her hand in his. For the first time, the choice was hers. Ethan watched them from the hallway, a smile breaking through his worry. "Daddy," he called softly, "is she coming home?" Daniel looked at Aisha. "Only if she wants to." She nodded. "Yes," she said. "I am." The mansion no longer felt like a monument to loss. Sunlight streamed through windows that had once reflected only shadows. Laughter, real, unguarded, found its way into rooms that had been silent for years. Aisha noticed it first the morning she returned. Not as a maid, not as a favor, but as a woman who had chosen to stay. Daniel woke early now. Not from pressure or panic, but purpose. He cooked breakfast badly. Burnt toast, runny eggs. Ethan complained dramatically, and Aisha laughed, leaning against the counter, arms folded like she'd always belonged there. This was not the life Daniel had built. It was the life he had almost lost. The world didn't change overnight. The press moved on slowly, grudgingly. Some headlines softened, others didn't. But Daniel no longer measured his worth by them. He started consulting, on his terms, teaching young founders how to build companies without losing themselves. The irony wasn't lost on him. One afternoon, as he spoke to a room full of eager faces, his eyes drifted to the back. Aisha stood there, not hidden, not invisible, watching him with pride. For the first time, success felt shared. Ethan changed, too. His attacks became less frequent, his laughter louder. One evening, he asked a question that stopped them both. "Can Aisha be my mom?" The room stilled. Daniel looked at her, careful, respectful. Aisha knelt in front of Ethan. "I can't replace your mom," she said gently. Ethan nodded. "I don't want a replacement. I want someone who stays." Aisha's throat tightened. She hugged him. "I can do that," she whispered. Months later, Daniel stood in the same kitchen where everything had changed. He held a small velvet box, not grand, not flashy, honest. "Aisha," he said, voice steady but eyes vulnerable. "You walked into my life when I was hiding from it. You didn't save me. You reminded me I was still alive." He knelt, not because he had to, but because he wanted to meet her at eye level. "Will you choose this life with me? Every imperfect, real moment of it?" Tears blurred her vision. "Yes," she said, "I already did." The wedding was small. No cameras, no headlines, just people who mattered. Sana cried the loudest. Ethan walked her to the aisle. And as Aisha stood there, no uniform, no borrowed identity, she realized something profound. Covering her sister's shift hadn't changed her life because she met a CEO. It changed her life because she stopped believing she had to remain unseen. Years later, Daniel would tell the story differently. Not about power or wealth, but about one ordinary night, one borrowed uniform, and the woman who walked into his house as a maid and walked out as his home. If this story touched your heart, don't let it end here. Subscribe to Heart and Soul Stories for more real emotions, quiet miracles, and unforgettable journeys that remind us love can appear when we least expect it.